All
Hey Tom,
right.
great to see you again. How's it going?
Hey, Will, what's going on? Good to see you.
Back for episode two or second try at this RevOps rundown. Um, Speaking of rundown, what's happening in your world? What have you seen? Anything interesting?
Outside of just the news, it's really hard to fit any interesting topics outside of what's going on. Seems like I get texts of articles sent every day, and I'm just bracing myself for what I could possibly be reading, whether it's the economy, whether it's the job market, whether it's, government business. There's so much out there. What about you, Will? You probably have more uh line of sight into some interesting things that are happening in our world.
Yeah, I think everything that's happening in tech is fascinating. To your comment, it's amazing how much stuff I get in my inbox and text just from like the just automation of automatic outreaches on LinkedIn or the rise and prevalence of Substack or just like all these new modern CRMs like Attio and Folk who are now doing WhatsApp messaging in the CRM. There's just like so much out there. But I think the thing we got to talk about is 11x. For the listeners who missed it, there was a TechCrunch story that came out last week of a software company, AI company out of London that was backed by Benchmark and A16Z. So very high profile VCs. And basically, through additional diligence, after Benchmark made I think it was a Series B investment, it came out that they claimed they had $10 million of ARR, and it turned out they only had $3 million of ARR. And stuff like that just makes you go, what? But it really speaks to the challenges of AI. AI native companies are having difficulty understanding their revenue because either they're a subscription basis or their subscription plus usage. And when you have a usage or consumption basis, you get like high levels of peaks and valleys. So you don't really, it's hard to forecast. But with 11x, for them to claim 10 million, basically they were a subscription basis for creating digital workers to automate SDR and BDR and really kind of funnel and pipeline lead gen stuff. They had an annual contract, but they also had a 3 month out clause or a 9-day out clause. And so they had over $10 million of ARR if you included the customers that are within the 90-day out clause, and actually included customers who left after 90 days. That was the big one too, because that's actually not contractual recurring revenue. They were no longer customers, they are churn customers, but they claimed it as a contracted $10 million of ARR, but they also did not disclose the churn rate after the trial period. So that's how they went from claiming 10 million ARR to actually only 3 million ARR contract recurring customers after 3 months. And kind of do the math there, they actually had around 80% churn after 3 months. So they had a base of about a million, and then they had 2 million kind of that were kind of past 3 months. Then they had a number, $7 million customers that did 3 months of subscription and then left.
Yeah.
So really shocked the AI native companies, really shocked the world of VC. But Tom, like it speaks to all these people chasing AI, and like they're just too busy to do actual diligence. And there's just like this rush to get companies invested in, kind of like we saw in 21 and 22. There was a rush to M&A, both public and private, and these valuations soared. I don't know. What's your
Yeah.
reaction?
It's almost as bad. Oh, actually, this is a lot worse than when you take your pilot customers and you call them customers, and you don't carve it all out. Look, I mean, there's a lot of social engineering happening, and it seems like this is now we have some financial engineering occurring across the boards. You know what? The question becomes, are we going to see more of this? Because think
Oh yeah.
about it. These AI companies they have to basically fulfill their obligations or the valuations that they're getting. It's a race. It's a race with others, and to see who can get there faster and bigger and better. There's going to be a lot more of this. This isn't I think we're gonna hear more of these stories come
Yeah.
along. Yeah, and it's not just for the investors, but also for those who work at these places, right? It's gonna be really incumbent upon you to not just jump on the hype train and say, "All right, AI, great. We're gonna be printing money all day." Like, no, no, sir, no, ma'am. That is not gonna happen. Do your due diligence. Just because they stick the words AI onto it doesn't mean it's gonna print gold. Do your diligence and just Yeah, luckily they got caught about and rightfully penalized.
Yeah, I think when I think about like applications of AI, or not applications, like where and how to apply AI. Like, I would say probably last year was AI enablement. So everyone had a chatbot, and it's shocking that most companies still don't have like a knowledge repository tied to a chatbot, an AI chatbot for internal and external uses. But like the first things you saw was like Salesforce had an AI chatbot, or Azure, or anyone else. Someone had some AI chatbot. And those are often on like what I refer to as systems of record, or really domain, like legacy, like entrenched vendors. And then you had the rise of what I refer to as prompt wrappers. So everyone knows an AI prompt is like, hey, write me a viral LinkedIn post. And that's like and they'll have a prompt for that behind the scenes that does that for you. I use it all the time on ChatGPT, as opposed to paying $30 for like, I think it's Code Symbol does it for you or whatever it is. So like there's these prompt wrappers, and I think of those as like just single use cases. Like I have a use case, I want to do a podcast or make a video, so I use an AI tool, or I want to make a LinkedIn post, I use an AI tool, or like I want to enrich a bunch of leads, so I use an AI tool. However, those are use cases, and I think what we're seeing, we're going to see, is the chaining of use cases to create workflows. And so we get away from this tool chaining of, like, I probably know from like 5 years ago, everyone would have Marketo and then have Outreach and then Salesforce and then NetSuite. And that kind of made your revenue kind of pipeline, if you will, was like content, engagement, and then some storage, and then, revenue recognition. But I think going forward, we're going to see a wave of workflows that have AI throughout them. And I think where we're seeing this is in these studios. So if you've played with Gemini Studio, or I use Vertex AI Studio. There's also Copilot Studio, and then there's AWS Bedrock, which is their studio. I love all these tools. But last week, the other big thing that occurred, I think, in my mind, outside the 11x story, is kind of like this institutional investor fundamental kind of like, problem occurring. But last week we saw Gemini come out with an Adobe killer. And I don't know if you followed this, but probably didn't, because like you have to live in the world of like AI and like what's coming out, is in Gemini Studio, you can upload a picture of yourself or upload any picture and then tell Gemini to change it. Whereas typically you have to send it to someone who has Adobe Acrobat and tell them to change it, and they would do something like remove someone else out there or add language or text on it. I went to Gemini Studio last week, took my 2018, 2019 headshot with like this awful background from some like, 2-bit photographer. And I was like, turn the background white. And I just did it like that. And as opposed to me driving somewhere, going to another photographer and putting a white background up, I just did it in Studio, and I didn't pay for Adobe. I didn't pay on Fiverr. I didn't like have to deal with like vendor applications. I just did it in Studio. And that's where we see in Gemini Studio and like Copilot, all these use cases out there. And so you see them like kind of be created in those studios, and then people will take those and make them into workflows. So then you could be like, build me a website with this picture, this content, make it all a white background or a dark background, and do it all for you. And that's where I think the next wave is coming.
Nice, nice. Well, I'm gonna use it just to say, make me 20 pounds lighter and bring back my hair on my
Yeah.
head, and then you've got me sold. All
Yeah.
right, there you go. I'll use that as my next set of Christmas pictures.
As we transition from like the rundown of what happened in RevOps this week, you're excellent at managing the weekly cadence. And I'd love to kind of transition this over to you, how you think about what meetings you have during the week, what's your framework, and how do you drive effectiveness?
Yeah, I mean, look, it obviously everything depends on the type of company you are, what we call the battle rhythm, right? Of how things are, are you a company that is well ahead? Are you a company that's catching up? Are you a company that is near the end of the quarter on a quarterly basis? Are you a company that has longer sales cycle? But, when I think about some of the core meetings that, particularly from a RevOps perspective, right, what should I expect if I were to go into an organization and I know that there's got to be a few set of meetings that I could interject in and jump into and just learn a little bit more about the business pretty quickly. I would say that there are maybe, probably four key ones that'll give me a good sense of what the organization is at right now in terms of health of their go-to-market. both their function and also in their business in general.
So before you do that, can you elaborate more on Cadence and why Cadence is so impactful?
Yeah, because I think, at the end of the day, you need to know, first of all, you and I we came from a military background. So understanding the cadence is important because it ensures that everyone in the organization is lockstep with what is going on, right? We're in organizations, even smaller companies today, where everyone has to be rowing at the same speed in the same direction, right, under the same guidance. And without a cadence, without something that says, these are the things that are happening at this point in time for this amount of time, and these are the objectives of why we're doing it. If you don't have any of that, you're just going to be kind of, it's going to be a mess. I mean, there's no other a better way to say it, but it's going to be a mess. You're just going to be conflicting with a lot of folks. You're going to have to redo certain things. You'll have fast starts, slow starts, and your organization is just going to crumble within itself because no one is talking to each other. No one knows what people are working on. So cadence prevents that. It provides the rails, I would say, to ensure that everyone's kind of looking at the same objective and rowing on the same time and rowing to the same place.
Yeah, I think to touch on the military analogy, I was in Iraq. Were you in Afghanistan or Iraq?
Both.
Oh, well, there you go. And so we had what we refer to as a battle rhythm. And the battle rhythm was to align to the mission. So it would be how many days you're out, how many patrols you're doing, when are you doing patrols. That way, higher resources, higher commanders and squadron level could then allocate Reapers or UAVs or fast movers or close air support based upon when we'd be out. And that way there was an understanding of the plan for the week and also our, my battle rhythm, Alpha Company would be one, and then the other kind of like signal wave, if you will, would be Bravo Company. When a Reaper would be overhead for me, then it would switch and go west over like Al Anbar province and cover Bravo Company. And that
Yeah.
way you align resources and it's all focused on the same mission. As you talk about it, your cadence for the week is basically your meeting cadence, and it should build on each other. That way, everyone's working towards something. So I don't believe you should start with like the strategic review on Monday. I think there should be some development to it. And so you kind of talk through how you structure a week.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, to your point, really quickly though, it's also, yeah, exactly. Like it helps you allocate resources as well. Like where do we need to go? Where do we see deficiencies or surplus of certain areas too? I think, speaking of deficiency surplus, like the first really big one that happens, usually it happens either at the very beginning or at the end of the week and set up for the next week's cadence is, looking at the forecasting meeting. Right? The forecasting meeting is the opportunity for sales people and their leadership to come together and really come and understand where are we going to land? Where is this business going to come from? Provides insights into the particular deals. It helps us look at the CRM. It really helps us understand the data is saying this thing. We're getting human, call it overlays, right? We have getting human folks saying, hey, look, yes, this is what I see coming in. I've had the meetings. It really gives and shapes a better picture for the leaders in the organization to understand where we're going to land. And it depends. It could be on those meetings where we're talking about, once again, if you're a company that relies on quarterly earnings, right, you need to ensure that this is pretty tight. It's more frequent than others. Other private organizations, maybe it's not as frequent, but ultimately it's understanding where you're going to land at that certain mile marker that you want to put in. And then at the same time, it's also talking about future deals that you'll see brewing up in the pipeline, making sure you have a good close date on when those deals are going to come in. So that's the first one.
On a forecast meeting, talk about that. Like, are you looking a month out, a quarter out? How do you structure the meeting? You spending 20 minutes of the 30 minutes on the next quarter or the current quarter, and then maybe 10 minutes on the year? Like, how do you think through it?
Yeah, I think for the most part, it's current quarter. But other times, going to be spent on the current quarter that you're in to make sure you close that out. And then, depending on where you are within that quarter, you'll start transitioning some of the time into the next quarter and making sure that you have a good view of what's about to come up. And this is also like a good way for you to signal to the sales folks, hey, what do you commit on bringing in this quarter versus what do you commit on bringing in next quarter, and not let it kind of what we call slip
Yeah.
from quarter to quarter, and really giving them the accountability that they deserve to say, hey, okay, you're committing to this, and then this is coming in at the end of the quarter, end of this particular date, and then this deal coming at the next quarter, and just really being able to kind of bifurcate the two versus having them all meshed up into one. But
So great, great questions. Questions drive accountability. Accountability drives behaviors. And so what are some of the tricks that you've seen sales reps do when they say, hey, Tom, I'm going to deliver this quarter, or no, that's going to be next quarter. What are some of the tricks?
well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily tricks, but the best questions I've always heard, particularly from the sales leader, is asking them specifically, what is the customer's incentive to close by this particular date, whether it's in quarter? Ask them that. Ask the sales reps so that they could then ask their potential prospect, how do we ensure that we know that this is coming in? They might say something like, well, they have to spend the money by the end of this date, or else it's gone and we don't have a date. Or, hey, there's an incentive that's aligned, some type of discount that's aligned at this particular date. And we have always stood our ground by not giving them discounts once they pass this date. Or, hey, it's tied to their renewal. That also renews at the same time. And no one wants to go through the procurement and finance process twice, right? So we want to try to line it up. So it's more of not necessarily like, having some type of tactic to prevent them from tricking you. I think it's just really asking, the right questions and saying, hey, salesperson, why do you think it's going to come in this, or what incentive do they have to ensure that this deal does not slip over to the next quarter?
Yeah. Yeah, I was kind of alluding to like, hey, well, you asked me, am I going to hit my 100K this quarter for net new ARR? I'm like, and I know that I'm actually going to hit 120, and I lack line of sight on next quarter. So I'm going to push out 15 or 20K into next quarter because it's only like 5 or 10 deals. And that way I know that I'm covered for next quarter. But that's really a individual's view of like, I'm on top of it. Because if I over deliver this quarter, you're going to be like, great, over deliver on top of that. Like
Yeah,
continue to drive the peak higher. And so those are some of the things that I've seen. And then
yeah,
of course there's the other view of like I'm below quota or below target this quarter. So to try to pull some deals forward. And then what that does is it kind of takes away from longer range annual planning of like, well, we expected this account to close in Q2, but you close it in Q1. How do you make up for that? So there's maybe the next meeting you talk about is pipeline and how do you manage pipelines?
yeah. On the note with pipelines, I've oftentimes seen forecasting meetings and pipeline meetings combined. They're different. Full stop. Pipeline meetings to me is really looking at not just within quarter, which is also very important, especially if you have short sales cycles. If you actually can if you could actually find deals, build up the pipe, and really ensure that they're being managed to where they could close in quarter, great. The pipeline is also, these pipeline calls should talk about the future, what we're looking at, right? Oftentimes you hear this a lot is, the lifeline of an organization is based on their pipeline. Do they have anything out there, right? You and I, we're both entrepreneurs. Business doesn't just come in front of our door. We're going to have to ensure that there's something out there for us to really predict what's going to happen. So pipeline meetings really, I think what the biggest difference, not just the fact that pipeline meetings talk about, what's going to close in far out futures, right? Quarter plus two, and all that. But it's also who's involved in these pipeline calls. The most successful pipeline calls, in my mind, are everyone's coming in. It's not just sales reps and their leadership, but anyone who touches pipeline. Anyone who touches it. This is SDRs, BDRs.
Yeah.
This is obviously sales, but marketing is part of your pipeline call, right? They need to know, particularly their top of funnel, what's that looking like? It's bringing the channels, right? The channel managers, they're in charge of pipeline because they're coming in from a different source. You can even bring in, your account management CS, because as much as they are trying to renew that business, they're also trying to grow out, and really increase net retention. So it's anyone who touches pipeline, anyone who's involved in it, those are the most successful ones, because guess what? They need to all know exactly who's doing what, how it's working, whether or not it's successful or not.
Yeah, I've been on a number of meetings when marketing, I brought them to the pipeline meeting for the first time, and they're like, oh, that sales rep has a customer use case that they're presenting. I could use that and run that into a marketing campaign. Or a sales rep's like, oh, I'm attending this new conference standing up in Munich. And the marketing is like, we got asked to be involved. I didn't know a sales rep was going there. We will now put a booth up for you. And so there's a
Uh-huh.
lot of just like cross-functional synergies.
Yeah, exactly.
Tom, how do you make sure a pipeline meeting doesn't turn into a case of I'm not getting enough qualified leads, or you don't know what a qualified lead is, or my dashboard says this? Like, how do you keep it from just like being a failure of a meeting?
Well, I think first of all, the best way to really do it is what I've seen is making sure these meetings are prepped beforehand. The pipeline meeting is not going to be the first meeting in which you're going to discuss a certain issue and kind of make it into a bitch session about leads not being really great, right? First of all, number one, prove it, right? Where is the metric on what dashboard indicates that leads are going down or the conversion rates are going down or whatever the metric that you're used, right? Back it up with data. And not only backing up with data, and this is where I think RevOps comes in, but have that data before the meeting. What I mean by that is the most successful pipeline meetings I've had, and I still do this in any organization that I go into and I recommend is, look, we're going to have a meeting. It's going to be, yes, there's going to be a deck that's going to be prepared beforehand. RevOps team will oftentimes will do it and they'll bring in those slides. They'll say, hey, this dashboard indicates that we're seeing a decrease in the conversion rates of our early pipeline, right? We're going to talk about leads not being great, not being prosecuted in the way that they should be, right? That's how you have those. And then, by the way, you go into the meeting, the data is the data, right? It shows what it is. Unless there's a fundamental disagreement how it's being measured, the data is the data. Now you're moving away from the lead suck and making a bid session, but into like, okay, great. Now, what do we need to do? What's different than before than now in which we could change things around? Kind of like the action plan. So I think that's a key way is having that data being backed up and then making that ready to go so that you're kind of almost already prepared. You're coming to the realization that this is already something that we know about. Our time spent in this meeting is being based on improving that metric or getting that better.
Yeah, 100% agree. I think some of the challenges on that in regard to the data side of things where I kind of live is you really want to make an automated reporting function. So that typically we build a data product tool, and that could be a data engineering pipeline that then feeds a dashboard, and then that dashboard is easily screenshotted or automatically populated into a slide deck. That's what I refer to as a data product tool.
Yep.
Now let's talk about like how do you defend and discuss data? Because I actually don't agree with you of saying like the data is the data. No, you actually need to make sure you got definitions of each term, and then you're citing the sources, and don't just show the data, show the driver behind the data. So if top of funnel conversions down, it needs to be tied to, hey, we tried this campaign and it turned out that inbound landing page had a flaw in the website. So only iOS users could use it as opposed to Android users. Or maybe this marketing content just wasn't an A grade content, is more of a C grade content. And so this quarter, when we had that campaign initiative, it didn't do well. So tie it to something, especially if you're heavy inbound, like I just example, or if it's outbound, maybe you spend a bunch of money on, keep talking about clay, and you've got all these prospect lists, but like, do you know your ICP? And then what's the difference between your ICP and your best customers? Are you spending money on data enrichment on what you think is who you should be selling to versus who you traditionally sell best to? And so this gets into like the drivers of like, why are we missing this? And this is where data professionals can go a layer deeper, because inherently, if you've got a sales team that's always had a good conversion rate, standard conversion rate, and something changes, that doesn't mean sales is at fault, because sales is a art, it's a practice. People who do sales well like are professionals, and it's, they have the same script, they know what to do, they know how to get a customer to say yes multiple times before they say yes to purchase. They know how to build relationships. And so if you have a standard trend and then it drops, don't look and blame the sales rep. Look at the other drivers and what are the
Oh yeah,
variables that may have caused that.
and that's the thing. The data will show that. When
Yeah.
I say disagreement with the data, right? I'm talking about if we fundamentally believe that we're measuring incorrectly on a particular measure. If we're not doing that, then we should agree, okay, great, we're aligned. 1 plus 1 is equal to 2, right? It's not equal to 3. We can't, if, someone said, well, does it really equal to 2? Can we really think about, if we have issues like that, then yes, start back, go backwards. We need to go back to the fundamentals of arithmetic to then go ahead and move forward to kind of figure out what's wrong. But if we all agree that that's the way that's being captured, the data will tell you the trends of what's going to be wrong. But
I think that's okay. You got to
that's another
so
topic.
you have to like put your foot down as a RevOps leader, and you also to be aligned with the sales leader and CRO about this is the fundamental way we are viewing this.
Yeah.
And if there needs to be a review of that, that's a separate meeting. That is not a let's discuss our architecture and fundamental process in the pipeline meeting. It is
Yeah.
this is what we ask you to do. This is how you're measured. This is the source of the and it should just be that clear because I always get so frustrated when someone's like, well, it's not exactly that, is it? I'm like, no, stop that BS. You need to understand, are you talking about an outlier issue? Or are you talking about like this one thing you heard about, rumor? Or are we talking about a material issue over 5% affecting revenue? And like, just we're all aligned on the language we speak and how we measure our performance. And if you're not aligned with that, then you need to speak to your manager. If you made a good point, your manager needs to bring it up, and then we can review it. But don't distract the meeting.
Yeah. Speaking of which, there's a couple more meetings that I think we want to quickly highlight that I think are really, in my mind, are meetings that are kind of table stakes you should be having in order to really run a great go-to-market function. One is, you have to have a finance sync meeting. And what I mean by that, this is particularly if you're in a RevOps organization that doesn't necessarily fall within the finance org, right? Maybe you're in RevOps that are more tied to the sales, or maybe there's COO function. But the finance sync meeting is making sure, hey, look, if at the end of the day, it's really about dollars and cents, it's your job as a RevOps professional to really be able to translate a lot of that to the finance folks so that they understand where the movements are going. And these meetings could go anywhere between, talking about maybe additional headcount that's needed and what those additional headcounts can provide. These financing meetings talk about, the comp and quota structure, right? How we want to maybe update it, change it, modify it in some way, and the justification behind that. Finance things could be talking about budgets. Like, what do we have? What do we, here's our forecast, right? And that, obviously, hopefully the finance team's getting on a weekly basis, but here's our forecast. Based on that, here are the changes that we think, and here are some of the investments that we need to put into it. Finance meeting could also, in companies where you have the ability to do this is, M&A, right? Some of the things what does that look like? Hey, if we were to acquire this new team or group or company, how does that increase what we're trying to do from a strategic level? So that's a really key one that I think not enough of it is being done because maybe people automatically assume it happens organically, but this is the time where you bring in some of the key players in finance, sales, RevOps, and all that, and making sure they are seeing eye to eye.
Yeah. And that last point, what level, like title level or functional level within RevOps goes to those meetings?
Look, you don't want to bring every single person within your organization, but I think at the minimum you have to have the representative. I don't know about the title level per se, right? But I think at the minimum, like let's say for example, I know organizations where a senior manager, while they may not sound as high as an executive, but that senior manager is responsible for that particular business group or that product. So yeah, if you're in a large organization where, we have so many different players that there's groups of individuals just solely responsible for a product group, bring them in. I think beyond that though, it's really more importantly about making sure who can best represent each of these key organizations to talk on their behalf and be able to come with numbers, be able to talk about the data and making sure that they're comfortable with it.
Yeah, I bring that up because I think with public companies, it's typically directors and above. Directors are the lowest down it will go, and typically it's the SLT, the senior leadership team, so like the VPs. So when you have at the VP level, you lose some of the granularity of like why is this occurring. And if you're a public company, you can be considered insider knowledge, and sometimes SVPs will be a officer of the organization. And so when you have these finance meetings, it is more sensitive. But if you don't include like a director who is knowledgeable about some of the granular details, then you lose out on some insight. And then the other piece, as you know, Tom, is like that VP or SVP or RevOps goes from a finance meeting and then runs to the next meeting. And there's not an easy transition to like implement what was discussed. So I think the who attends the meeting, one, it should be happening. And two, like there's a really need to be really thoughtful about who attends it. And I'm an advocate for at least a director.
The other meaning that I want to also talk about, and this, once again, this is, the first three we talk about forecasting, we talk about pipeline meetings, we have a financing, but, another big meaning that I've seen, particularly in organizations that I would say where a particular deal could really swing the numbers one way or the other. What I mean by that is, there's large enough deals where it could literally hit or miss your targets. You have these big deal review meetings. And these big deal review meetings is talking about some of these key particular opportunities. This may sound like it's a blending a little bit with forecast meetings, but some of these big deal meetings are deals that may not come in within this quarter and may not or you might not give it the attention that it particularly deserves. And what you don't want to do is talk about one of your largest deals that come only when it's in play that particular quarter. So these big deal meetings are deals that necessarily don't have the timeline of when they close is not as important as the amount of effort that needs to get placed onto them to ensure that they are going to come in successfully. So these we're talking about like aligning a leadership, right? Hey, we're about to talk to their CFO. So we need to ensure that we have someone of equal caliber coming into that meeting to go ahead and talk about the product. Or, hey, their head of engineering is coming because they believe that our product integrate really well with theirs. I may not be the right person. I need to bring a solution engineer. I need to bring someone that could talk shop with that person and give them the confidence that we know what we're talking about. These big deal reviews goes into that type of level of granularity. So also, once again, depending on your organization, right? If you're a fast sales cycle, small deals here and there, credit card type of stuff might not be as important. But look, if you have a big deal or it requires a heavy amount of procurement or a channel to go through, like a government deal, you're having these conversations.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's a great call out, Tom. Same with the financing, great call out. I think about the deal reviews. It's typically like a named account or they need some sort of white glove efforts. So I think of someone like an IBM. They've got 230 subsidiary companies and other accounts. And if you're working with like a global conglomerate like that, you do want to have an executive presence. And it may take longer because you're trying to sell the enterprise or a portion of the enterprise. You got to meet a lot of people. And this kind of gets
Yeah.
into that idea of like global account director. Like when does an account reach a global level? And then that global account director has access to those resources of legal or engineering or product faster and easier than others. And so
Yeah.
this really brings up a lot more things. And I
Yeah.
like all these meetings you're laying out. What's your next one?
You like these meetings, but then I'm just thinking, man, how many times have we been in one of these meetings? We're like, does this have to be a meeting?
Yeah.
Do we have to have more meetings on the damn calendar? Jesus. But look, some of these are important. Some of them are necessary evils. And we didn't even talk about some other things that, in my background, your background that we've done, right? We've enablement meetings, right? Talk about like, hey, how's onboarding going? Do we have all the right materials? Or maybe these enablement meetings are talking about future kickoff or mid-sale cycle training that we're going to have to do, playbook launches, all that. IT meetings, right? These are tech meetings or tech councils. Maybe it's not run by RevOps, but it's talking about some of the different tools we're going to be integrating, new data systems, new heavy lifts that will require our eyes and ears on it as much as we can as we transition or augment a particular tool set. Meetings of CS, post-sales meetings, right? The renewal meetings, right? If you're in a recurring business that requires having great customer retention, mitigating churn, I hope you have a meeting that dedicates specifically on the upcoming renewals they're going to have, right? These are critical ones too. So there's a whole gamut of different ones that you could go through, but those are just some ones on top of my head.
How did you decide or how do you delegate? And then what do you expect from who you delegate to?
Yeah, unfortunately, delegation was a little bit difficult to do because, you're such a core component of those meetings. But, I think what it comes down to is, really is making sure, hey, is there anything that my team could help you with? Right. At the end of the day, probably one of the advantages or disadvantages, right, of not being on the client facing side of these things is that oftentimes, these are the only times you'll be able to hear about what you can or cannot do. You don't directly hear from the customer per se. So, whenever there's an issue where I can't attend, I just want to know, all right, hey, what can I do, right? What are you hearing from the field? You're out there on the battlefield engaging with the prospects, the current customer all the time. All right. I'm the guy in the back just trying to help make your life a lot easier. So what do I need to do? Like, tell me what I can do, provide me the insight that I need to get a better operational picture of what's going on, and I'll do my best to go ahead and assign and allocate the resources necessary to help you all out.
I love it. I'm picturing you being like a staff ops operations officer in Afghanistan. What can I do? I need more rounds down range. I need
Yeah.
more air cover. I need more CAS. Just bring it.
Done.
Bring it. Yeah.
Done. It's in the CRM though. If it's not, then
Yeah.
it's like I don't hear what's going on. So
Can I get an official SIPA request? Yeah.
yeah.
We didn't even talk about some signal on a rundown this week. And
Oh yeah. 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 There
oh
you
my
go.
gosh, so much
Yeah.
this week. This is a longer one, but I think this was important, Tom.
Yeah.
So if I recap these and correct me, you talked about pipeline meeting before forecast meeting, and then probably the deal review, which is, larger meeting, and that enables a good finance sync. And then you kind of have these important, but maybe able to be delegated or maybe able to be in an email form of like enablement meetings, CS and account management, and then these tech council meetings because we all know we have way too many tech projects. Am I accurate? Am I close? How do you think about
Yeah,
that?
look, I wouldn't necessarily. It's one of those meetings where some of these meetings can't be delegated. Some of these meetings you got to be in. Some of these meetings you have to run it itself. It's that important. So, but I think the point is there's a lot, right? There's a lot. There's some core ones that I think you have to have your ears close to the ground to understand what's going on. If anything, it highlights the vast need of having RevOps there because there's so many different movements, so many different organizations that rely on you, so many different places where you could interject, input, and provide value. And there's probably, we're going to end this conversation and I'm going to be like, oh my God, I can't believe
Yeah.
we didn't talk about this particular, cadence or part of the cadence that we need to talk about, right? But that's the essence of it. It's just there's a lot of different hands involved. You need to be aware of them, and these are opportunities for you to get aware of them so that you can provide the value to the teams.
Yeah, we'll do other episodes on a monthly and quarterly and annual battle rhythm. The last thing I was asking you is like, when you have all these meetings, are you disseminating as soon as possible? Or are you taking time to like review your notes and then send out something? And then you have it handle internal meetings. What's your communication strategy?
Yeah, this is I think where kind of in the past I've basically jot down a lot of notes and then tried to synthesize as much as I can to send out clear ask and next steps. The great thing about AI these days is it kind of does that for us now in a way, right? If you're not using AI to take notes in your meetings to synthesize all this and compile it in a way, then you're doing a disservice to yourself. But I think this is why it's really important to be able to, sometimes even record the meetings, right? To where, you don't worry about taking the smallest notes and you're gonna miss something, but having it also just kind of synthesize it for you. So yeah, I like to get those notes out as quick as possible because once again, right, there's some people that can't attend, or there's some things that require immediate need, and you don't have time to kind of digest it and sit on it too much.
Yeah, and no, we haven't done intros yet, but the reason I'm asking Tom these questions is Tom helped take Slack from what, like a Series B to public, and then you also like what double the size of LinkedIn from your background in RevOps. Like he's done some pretty impactful projects and companies, and he has
I did
learned.
not do that on my own. Let me just be very clear that these are I just happen to be at these companies where a lot of this happened to
And we
occur.
know
So
team is
I
at the
might
center.
have played a small role in
Yeah,
getting some of these things, but do not, no, I'm not doing it.
like a
Do not
good
say
team
I have it.
player, focus on everybody else. But yes, meetings require good meeting requires everyone to be effective and tuned in and not distracting
Yeah.
and making sure they're asking aligned questions. And so I think this is a great rundown of key meetings during the week. And we even touch on monthly meetings like MBRs or QBRs. But thanks, Tom. This is excellent. And we'll definitely do another episode sometime around monthly cadence and quarterly cadence.
Yeah. Sounds good. Well, thanks.